There are passages in the Bible that seem forgotten, almost whispers among shouts. Jeremiah is one of these voices. A prophet considered by many as the herald of suffering, but whose words hold hidden layers that challenge common understanding. Imagine if, amidst his lamentations and warnings, there was a veiled code, a key to understanding not only the fate of Israel, but also the lost lineage of the one who would change the course of humanity. We are faced with a disquieting possibility. What if Jeremiah's words contained hidden clues about the royal blood of Christ, concealed under the veil of prophecy? Most people know Jeremiah as the prophet of tears, the one who announced the fall of Jerusalem and saw his people taken into captivity. But few realize that his writings are filled with nuances, abrupt interruptions, and fragments that seem disconnected. Why do certain chapters seem displaced or even out of order? Why do some verses sound more like cryptic visions of the future than immediate warnings for his time? When these texts are read with attentive eyes and an open heart, it becomes apparent that something pulses between the lines, a carefully guarded secret. For centuries, scholars have noted that the book of Jeremiah presents an unusual textual structure. In some ancient Hebrew versions, the order of the chapters is completely different from modern versions. This is not just a copying error. It may be a deliberate attempt to conceal something so disturbing that it needed to be scrambled, fragmented, and reorganized to prevent premature revelation. What was moved, and why? Here begins what many call the Jeremiah Code, not a numerical code as popularized in the modern era, but a symbolic and mystical arrangement that requires more than intellect. It demands intuition. Jeremiah does not speak only to his own time. At various moments he mentions the righteous branch, a mysterious figure descended from David who would emerge in a future time to restore justice and truth. But what's curious is that this branch is mentioned in an almost coded way, with words loaded with ambiguity. He is described as someone who will be called the Lord, our righteousness, a divine title attributed to a human being. Here, the attentive reader begins to realize that Jeremiah was not only predicting a Messiah, he was hiding clues about his identity and, perhaps, his lineage. What if this renewal was not just a spiritual figure? What if Jeremiah was indicating a hidden bloodline, a legitimate heir who escaped the destruction of the Davidic throne? When the temple fell and the royal lineage was seemingly extinguished, a question lingered. Where did King David's descendants go? Some ancient rabbis suggested that this lineage was hidden, preserved in secret until the time of revelation. Jeremiah may have been one of the few who knew of this truth and veiled it in prophetic language so it could survive the centuries without being destroyed. Another fundamental element is the role of Baruch, Jeremiah's faithful scribe. Baruch was more than a mere copyist. He was the keeper of records, the archivist of the sacred. Some apocryphal and pseudepigraphal texts, such as the Book of Baruch, attribute to him visions and missions that indicate a deep awareness of the messianic future. There are theories that Baruch preserved scrolls that were not included in the official canon, texts that would contain specific instructions for identifying the true heir. These ideas are rejected by the official traditions. But why? What is in these writings that needed to be silenced? In Jeremiah 33, we find something even more intriguing, a promise that there will never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel for David. This statement does not match historical reality. After the exile, there was never again a Davidic king. The monarchy vanished. Or did it? Or was the lineage hidden, secretly waiting for the right time to resurface? Jeremiah's own text asserts that God would keep this promise forever. Unless we take it literally, we must consider the possibility that this lineage survived, perhaps not publicly, but in silence. This silence may be the key. In various spiritual cultures, what is most sacred is also the most hidden. The lineage of Christ, if it truly carries the royal blood, could never be exposed to the common gaze. It would be a target for destruction, persecution, and manipulation. The silence of Jeremiah, the way he organizes his prophecies, may be a way to hide and at the same time preserve. Thus, the Jeremiah Code is not a conventional cipher, but a dance between what is said and what is hidden, a play of shadows and lights. There is also a spiritual dimension to this mystery. Jeremiah was a visionary, someone who spoke of covenants not written on tablets, but in the heart. This is not just prophetic poetry. It may be a clue. The true lineage of Christ may not be just biological, but spiritual. A living lineage that is recognized not by blood, but by awakened consciousness. And if the code is not to identify a single man, but an entire generation carrying this calling within themselves, and if you, in some way, are part of this lineage, not by heredity, but by mission. It's at this point that the code becomes personal. Jeremiah didn't just write for kings, priests, or scribes. He wrote for all times. His words are seeds that only germinate when they fall on fertile ground. The question is not only, what did he mean, Zrenia, but what are you capable of understanding now? The code is not deciphered with pure logic, but with openness. The key may be within you, and that changes everything. At the end of this first part, the enigma has only grown. The suspicion that Jeremiah concealed crucial information about Christ's lineage is no longer just a hypothesis. It's a journey that compels us to revisit the past with new eyes. A quest for truths buried not only under the dust of centuries, but under the structures of power and institutionalized religion. We are just beginning to unravel an ancient map that could change our perception of sacred history. To understand the extent of the mystery of Christ's hidden lineage, it is necessary to go back to the breaking point, the division of the Kingdom of Israel. After the death of King Solomon, the United Kingdom of Israel fragments into two, the northern kingdom, called Israel, and the southern kingdom, known as Judah. This political and spiritual schism was not just a power struggle, it was the beginning of a symbolic split that would echo for centuries, reverberating even into the times of Christ. God's promise to David, that his lineage would reign forever, seemed at risk. Yet, amidst the fragmentation, a silent seed continued its course. With the fall of the northern kingdom, 10 tribes scattered among the peoples, becoming what we now call the lost tribes of Israel. Judah, the southern kingdom, held out longer, but also eventually succumbed to Babylonian power. Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple desecrated, and the last Davidic king, Zedekiah, was captured, his sons executed before his eyes. From this event, the monarchy seemed to have come to an end. But did it really? Or was it just cast into the shadows, like a flame that withdraws to reignite at another time? It's in this moment of destruction that the prophecy of the righteous branch gains strength. Jeremiah, facing the collapse of Judah, speaks of a figure who would arise from David's lineage. This figure, however, would not come as a traditional king. He would be someone hidden, germinating in silence. The Hebrew term used, tzemach, means sprout, something that springs from what seemed dead. It's the image of a branch that sprouts from a cut trunk. This powerful metaphor carries more than hope. It suggests invisible continuity. The lineage did not die. It hid itself. Interestingly, there are historical records that indicate not all members of the royal house were killed by the Babylonians. There is the figure of Ebed-Melech, an Ethiopian who saves Jeremiah from prison, and it's possible that he also helped to hide members of the house of David. There are theories pointing to the escape of descendants to regions like Egypt and even Ethiopia, places where, centuries later, messianic traditions would continue to pulse in a mysterious and persistent way. These stories, although ignored by canonical accounts, remain alive in oral traditions and apocryphal texts. The concept of the promised seed begins to take on an even deeper connotation. It's not just about genealogical lineage, but about a spiritual legacy secretly passed on, protected by small groups over the centuries. This seed is cultivated not in palaces, but in prepared hearts. In many ways, this is the true code, a map that points not only to the past, but requires spiritual perception to be deciphered in the present. Jeremiah, with his symbolic language and his unsettling visions, may have been one of the first guardians of this truth. While the Jewish people were experiencing exile, the prophets spoke of restoration, but not as it had once been. The glory of Solomon would not return in the same way. The new kingdom would be different, less political and more spiritual. Jeremiah prophesies a time when God will make a new covenant, not like the old one, but one that will be written on hearts. It is in this new covenant that the hidden lineage manifests itself, a bloodline that does not seek physical thrones, but awakened consciences. The lineage of Christ, therefore, may have continued not by the sword, but by wisdom and spirit. Another point that deserves attention is the figure of King Jeconias, predecessor of Zedekiah, who was taken captive, but mysteriously kept alive and treated with honor by foreign kings. This raises questions. Why would a defeated king receive such treatment? There are records indicating that his lineage was kept alive, and there are mentions in later chronicles suggesting descent. If this is true, then the royal lineage not only survived, but was strategically preserved, a hidden heritage in plain sight, protected until the right time came. The genealogies in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke offer intriguing clues. Although different, both point to David as an ancestor of Jesus. The divergence between the names has caused confusion for centuries, but it may indicate the crossing of lineages, perhaps uniting separate branches of the royal house. This reinforces the idea that Christ's blood was, in fact, the legitimate heir to the throne of Israel, a threat not just spiritual but political, to the powers of the time. Hence the interest of the Roman and Jewish authorities in neutralizing him. But what if this threat had not ended with the crucifixion? And what if, as some Gnostic texts suggest, the lineage continued in secret? This is where the concept of the silent lineage comes in, protected by secret groups, guardians of a heritage that could not be known to the outside world. Essenes, Nazarenes, and other mystical groups could have played a key role in this safeguarding. What unites all these elements is the notion that the righteous offspring did not disappear. It simply took on other forms, less visible, but equally potent. The implications of this are profound. They suggest that the story told in the Gospels may merely be the surface of a much older plot, intertwined with prophecies, exiles, persecutions, and hopes. Jeremiah was not a neutral observer of these events. He was a conduit, a transmitter of messages that were to be activated at the right time, and that time may be now. The prophecy still resonates, waiting for its listeners to understand its message not with earthly ears, but with inner perception. If Jeremiah's code is a trail, then the promise of the sprout is the seed that guides us. And this seed might very well be germinating at this very moment, in unexpected places, in ordinary people who carry within them the call of a forgotten lineage. The big question that arises is, what if you too carry this heritage? What if the real mission is not to prove Christ's lineage historically, but to recognize it spiritually within you? Upon concluding this part, the feeling is that the veil is slowly lifting. What seemed just a biblical drama from the past begins to take on the contours of a living story, which continues to unfold behind the scenes of humanity. The promised seed is not just a memory, it's a summons. And perhaps, without realizing it, you have already felt this silent call, coming from the depths of prophecy. Amid the shadows of Jerusalem's destruction, while the temple burned and kings fell, a man was writing. Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe, was more than a mere secretary. He was the silent guardian of words that could not be spoken aloud. The Bible briefly mentions him, but his significance is monumental. If Jeremiah was the prophetic mouth, Baruch was the hand preserving the code. And there's something mysterious about how he vanishes from the official narrative. Where did he end up? And why were his texts relegated to the so-called Apocrypha? The name Baruch means blessed in Hebrew, a symbolic choice perhaps. He appears at key moments in Jeremiah's life, including during the exile. But the texts attributed to him, such as the Book of Baruch and the Apocalypse of Baruch, were excluded from the traditional Hebrew canon and only survive in Christian and Gnostic collections. These writings contain visions, revelations, and prophetic structures that expand and deepen the themes presented by Jeremiah. Moreover, they speak of a hidden truth, a spiritual heritage that was concealed to protect its integrity. Baruch, unlike the prophets, did not have the mission to confront kings or crowds. His role was to record and preserve. The scribe was the human vault where the sacred words were hidden from time and enemies. In the Apocalypse of Baruch, he receives visions about the future of Israel, the destruction of the temple, and the emergence of a new era. He speaks of a city not made by human hands, of a restoration not material, but spiritual. His language is laden with symbolism, suggesting that more was being said than what is written on the surface. This tendency towards symbolism opens a fascinating possibility. What if Baruch recorded encrypted information about the Davidic lineage and the fate of its descendants? What if he, like the Essenes centuries later, believed that certain truths could only be revealed to initiates? The silence surrounding him may not be a historical accident. It could be a spiritual strategy. Instead of hiding truths in caves or archives, he hid them in words, in rhythms, in pauses, a literary code for future awakening. There are scholars who argue that Baruch had access to books that never reached the public. In the Ethiopian tradition, for example, he is considered one of the great hidden patriarchs, part of a lineage of knowledge transmitters. In certain Jewish mystical circles, there are references to the Scroll of Baruch, containing unrevealed messianic visions. Even without concrete material evidence, the simple fact that these traditions have survived for millennia is an indication that his legacy was deeper than is acknowledged. The scribe became a symbol of hidden knowledge. The connection with Christ enters through the side door of this story. If Baruch really had access to details about David's lineage, and if these details were recorded or orally transmitted through mystical lines, such as the Essenes or the Therapeuti of Alexandria, then his influence may have spanned centuries. Many of the apocryphal Gospels, like that of Thomas or Mary Magdalene, share this coded language, with spiritual layers of interpretation. Could this have been the legacy left by Baruch? An invisible thread stitching together those who knew, those who sought, those who waited. The absence of Baruch in modern religious debates is a sign of the effectiveness of his silence. In a world where noise is constant, silence becomes revolutionary, and it is precisely in this silence that the strength of his message rests. He did not seek recognition nor power. His commitment was to the truth that should outlive empires. Baruch's silence is the kind of absence that speaks, and what it says is both terrifying and liberating at the same time. The truth about Christ's lineage may have been preserved by those who never appeared on the pulpits. Jeremiah trusted Baruch as if he were an extension of his own soul. In one of the most tense moments when the prophet's life was at risk, he ordered Baruch to publicly read his words in the temple. This was not just an act of trust, it was a rite of passage. Baruch assumed the role of substitute prophet, someone with the authority to speak, but who chose to write. The power of the pen over the sword, the continuity of the messianic lineage may have started there, in the hands of the one who wrote what could not be spoken. The idea of a written lineage also needs to be considered. If the Davidic lineage was extinguished from a biological standpoint, it could survive as a spiritual legacy recorded by scribes. The records of genealogies, the scrolls of royal families, all of this could have been hidden, perhaps in the deserts, perhaps among isolated communities. And what if these records were encoded by Baruch? This would explain why no definitive proof has been found to this day. It's not lost, it's veiled, protected until the right time comes. Baruch can also represent something greater, the archetype of the bearer of hidden truth. He is the symbol of all those who keep the light alive in times of darkness, who guard what cannot yet be understood. In spirituality, this archetype is essential. Without it, knowledge would be dissipated, corrupted, used for manipulation. Baruch, by remaining in the shadows, ensures that the truth blossoms at the exact right moment. Not before, not after. Like the seed that sleeps in winter, waiting for spring. It's impossible not to reflect on the role that this silence plays in our own lives. How many truths are veiled, not because they are unattainable, but because we are not ready? And if Baruch's legacy is not just historical, but inward? And if we all carry within us the potential to record, preserve, and transmit something sacred? His silence invites us to listen to what is beyond words, to discover within ourselves what the world is not yet ready to accept. At the end of this section, the mystery deepens. The exile of truth may not have been a tragic historical mistake, but a deliberate plan to protect something infinitely valuable. Baruch did not fail in spreading the word. He triumphed in preserving it. And what he preserved might be the missing link between the lineage of David and the Christ to come, and who perhaps is still yet to come. Baruch's silence is not empty. It's the pause before the revelation. When we talk about Jesus as a spiritual figure, we often forget the political impact that his mere existence caused. He was not just a master of crowds, he was a man with a lineage. And this lineage carried a powerful name, David. For the Jews of the time, this was more than symbolic. It represented an eschatological hope. For the rulers, however, it was a real, living, and throbbing threat. And no character embodies the fear of this royal blood better than Herod the Great. Herod was a king without lineage. Appointed by Rome, he ruled Judea with an iron fist, trying to please both Jews and Romans. But he knew he was not legitimate. He was not a descendant of David, nor was he a pure Jew. He came from the Idumeans, an enemy of Israel in the past. Therefore, the mere idea of someone with royal blood, coming from the lineage of David, was intolerable to him. It was not just a religious threat. It was a challenge to his throne, to his power, and to his life. It is within this context that one of the darkest episodes in the Gospels occurs, the massacre of the innocents. When the Magi from the east arrive in Jerusalem seeking the newly born king of the Jews, Herod panics. He orders the execution of all boys in Bethlehem under 2 years of age. This barbaric act was not a simple fit of madness. It was a strategic move by a paranoid king who was well aware of the symbolic weight of David's lineage. For him, the birth of a legitimate heir was the announcement of his end. But Jesus was not the only descendant of David alive at that time. Many scholars point out that several families carried this bloodline, and some of them were aware of their origin. That's why Rome and the Herodians kept stringent records of genealogies, not out of religious interest, but to identify potential rivals. Some historians claim that during the reign of Domitian, members of Jesus' family were persecuted because of their lineage. The blood of David was watched, feared, and silenced. This is where the idea of the hidden lineage takes on new dimensions. It was not only hidden for spiritual reasons, but also for survival. Being a descendant of David was dangerous. It meant being in the crosshairs of the powerful. Thus, many remained silent. Many erased names, destroyed family trees, and concealed origins. The truth was kept out of fear, but also out of honor. The lineage that could restore David's throne was forced into clandestinity, a silent resistance against the empires of the world. Rome, in turn, did not see the nascent Christianity as a harmless religion. Initially, the movement was seen as a Jewish sect with political implications. A king who promised a different kingdom was, to them, a potential rebel. That's why they crucified Jesus, as an insurgent, not as a heretic. The crown of thorns, the inscription, King of the Jews, the trial before Pilate, all this shows that the threat was not theological, but monarchical. Jesus carried something more dangerous than dogmas: inheritance. From there on, the persecution of Christians also became an attempt to erase traces. The first followers of Christ were hunted, not only for preaching love and truth, but for belonging to a current linked to the real past of Israel. Many hid their origins, others fled to remote regions, Egypt, Ethiopia, Persia. Isolated communities preserved oral traditions and genealogical records that may still await discovery today. The heritage was protected like a fire lit during the night. Herod could not erase the blood. Rome could not stifle the legacy. And perhaps this is the greatest proof that there was something more than a faith story. There was a resilient historical thread, intertwined with prophecy and flesh. A thread that connected the fallen throne to the cross and would continue its journey in the following centuries. A lineage that needed to hide to survive, like the root of a tree that, even when cut, insists on sprouting again. In the esoteric tradition, much is spoken about spiritual lineages and the hidden kings. There are legends that speak of descendants of Christ living in secret, preserving not just the physical DNA, but the spiritual code of the Messiah. These stories, although rejected by official theologies, persist strongly in Gnostic, Templar, Sufi, and even Druid traditions. Are these hidden lineages just myths? Or are they echoes of a carefully suppressed reality? The existence of a Christic lineage that has survived the centuries would represent not only a historical revolution, but a spiritual earthquake. The idea that the Messiah's blood remains alive, perhaps awakened in ordinary people, would bring to light a new responsibility, to live according to this legacy. And it is precisely this type of power that Rome and Herod feared, not the power of material kingdoms, but of awakened consciences that do not bow to lies. The true throne that threatened the empire was not made of gold, but of spirit. Upon concluding this section, we realize that the silence surrounding Christ's lineage was not accidental. It was built with fear, violence, and censorship, but also with courage, faith, and sacrifice. Herod tried to eliminate the future. Rome tried to silence the past. But the truth, like the seed of renewal, remains, growing in the shadows, and perhaps now, preparing to bloom once again before eyes finally ready to see. Imagine a group of men living in the desert, on the fringes of the known world, devoted to silence, contemplation, and writing. They avoided the Temple of Jerusalem, rejected the corruption of the priests, and eagerly awaited a Messiah, or rather two. These men were the Essenes, and their mission was more than religious. It was spiritual, political, and perhaps genealogical. Inside the caves near the Dead Sea, they preserved texts that, when discovered 2,000 years later, would reignite one of the greatest enigmas in human history. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956, contained ancient copies of biblical texts, as well as hymns, community rules, sacred calendars, and apocalyptic visions. But among these dusty pages, mysterious references also emerged to figures such as the Master of Justice and two Messiahs, one priestly and one royal. This division is significant. It echoes ancient prophecies of Jeremiah and Zechariah and points to the existence of a royal lineage which was being prepared in secret. The royal lineage to which the Essenes referred was not symbolic. For them, it was literal. They believed that descendants of the house of David were alive, hidden from the world, waiting for the right moment to emerge and restore the sacred covenant. This belief was not isolated. It was rooted in the scriptures, in the genealogical records they kept, and in a deep sense of mission. If the real Messiah was a promised figure, he should come from the lineage of David. And where better to protect it from the Roman Empire and the priestly betrayal than in the depths of the desert? The Master of Justice mentioned in the manuscripts may have been one of these hidden heirs. Some scholars believe he was persecuted and killed by corrupt leaders, which strongly echoes the fate of Jesus. But there are also those who see him as a preparatory figure, a kind of messianic prototype whose mission was to preserve knowledge and protect the lineage. Either way, the Essenes recorded their story as a warning. The world is not ready for the whole truth, and for that reason, it needs to be veiled. The parallels between the Essene teachings and the sayings of Jesus are striking. The emphasis on loving one's neighbor, on humility, on separating from the corrupted world, on waiting for a divine kingdom that was not of this world. All this points to a direct influence or a common origin. Some researchers suggest that Jesus had contact with the Essenes in his youth. Others go further and propose that he was trained by them. If this is true, the Essenes not only protected the lineage, they educated it for its future mission. Even more revealing is the hidden content of the manuscripts, texts that were deliberately withheld from the public for decades. Why were certain scrolls locked away in Vatican and university vaults? What was in them that couldn't be revealed immediately? The most accepted theory is that they contained messianic interpretations that would shake the official narrative of Christianity and Judaism. But there are also those who claim that these texts named real descendants, protected by secret oaths and by a continuous spiritual lineage. Among these documents, the War Scroll stands out, which describes a final conflict between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. It's not just a spiritual battle, but also a dispute for legitimate leadership. The text speaks of strategies, priestly lineages, and the return of the true ruler. This war, not yet realized, may be symbolic, or a prophecy of a time when the hidden lineages return to the global scene. The renewal of Jeremiah, perhaps, reborn from the millennial silence. There is also the Damascus document, which mentions a secret alliance between chosen righteous ones, formed long before Jesus' birth. These children of the covenant followed a distinct calendar, rejected the priesthood of Jerusalem, and awaited the coming of the two anointed ones. This text speaks of signs, genealogies, and blood purity. The idea of lineage here is central, not only in the ethnic sense, but of a preserved spiritual inheritance, like a golden thread sewn into the robe of history, invisible to the common eye. And what about the Copper Scroll, perhaps the most intriguing of all? Instead of religious texts, it lists hidden treasures, gold, silver, and sacred artifacts buried in secret locations. Many believe that this list points to relics from Solomon's temple, but there are also those who claim that the real treasure was genealogical records, royal seals, or even documents about the true lineage of David. Could this be the reason why these scrolls were buried with such zeal? All of this converges to one question. What if the Essenes were preparing for a return of the sacred lineage? Not just as a mystical event, but as a concrete restoration of a royal lineage. What if they knew that, at some point in the future, it would be necessary to reveal this heritage, and that's why they kept everything a secret? Their texts, rituals, and community rules show a disciplined organization, dedicated to the mission of protecting what could not yet be revealed. What emerges from this analysis is more than history, it's a summons. The Essenes may have been the first conscious caretakers of Christ's hidden lineage, not just witnesses, but active parts of a plan that spans millennia. A plan that involves blood, wisdom, and silence. A plan that may be reaching its culmination. And the question remains, if the world wasn't ready back then, is it now? Upon concluding this section, the feeling is one of reverence. The Essenes lived on the fringes of official history, but perhaps they were the true authors of a chapter we are yet to understand. The desert that sheltered them also concealed the deepest secrets of Judeo-Christian spirituality. And now that the sands have begun to shift, we may finally be on the verge of discovering what they truly safeguarded. The Torah has always been seen by the wise as more than just a simple book of stories. For those initiated, it is a kind of divine code where each letter, each word, carries multiple layers of meaning. At the heart of this tradition is Gematria, a numerical interpretation system that assigns values to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Through it, rabbis and mystics discovered hidden connections between seemingly distant concepts, Jeremiah, as a prophet of depth and mystery, would not escape this scrutiny. On the contrary, many believe that he was one of the ones who used the code most in his words. In Gematria, the Hebrew word for Messiah, Mashiach, has the numerical value of 358. Interestingly, this same number appears in other key words, such as snake, Nachash, pointing to a tension between salvation and temptation, light and shadow. But when we look at the texts of Jeremiah, we find more specific patterns. The name David, for example, has the value 14, and this number appears several times in the Old Testament as a subtle echo of the royal lineage. In the Gospels, Matthew even structures Jesus' genealogy in blocks of 14 generations, as if he were pointing to a known code. Another striking example occurs in Jeremiah 23:5-6, where he speaks of the righteous branch, the one who will reign with wisdom. In this passage, the name by which he will be called is Yhwh Tzidkenu, the Lord, our righteousness. The gematria of this expression has a hidden value that connects with other messianic prophecies, especially in Isaiah and Zechariah. This is not a coincidence. The ancient rabbis knew that names and titles were gateways to understanding the messianic identity, and some of these gateways, when opened, lead directly to very specific historical figures. This is where the code begins to play the name of Jesus, Yeshua. The Hebrew form of the name Yeshua has a value of 386, and there are hidden codes in passages like Jeremiah 31, especially in the famous verse about the new covenant, where God promises to write his law on our hearts. When applying the method of equidistant letter counting, used by modern scholars of the Bible code, combinations such as Yeshua, Nazarene, and covenant emerge, among other words. Although controversial, these discoveries have sparked heated debates about the possible anticipation of the figure of Christ in the oldest texts. In addition to gematria, among the ancient Hebrews, there was a profound respect for prophetic numbers. Jeremiah mentions 70 years of exile for the people of Israel, a number that is repeated throughout the scriptures. 70 is the number of nations, of the languages of the Tower of Babel, of Moses' elders. 7, multiplied by 10, represents the complete cycle, the sacred totality. When applied to the concept of lineage, it suggests that the restoration of David's throne would not occur immediately, but after a determined period of waiting and purification. This type of symbolic language was not an invention of Jeremiah. It was part of a millennial tradition, a way of conveying messages that would survive censorship, destruction, and oblivion. The Hebrew code was more than a numbers game. It was a web of meanings designed to protect sacred truths. The prophets knew that, in times of oppression, the only way to keep hope alive was by encoding it in symbols, repetitions, and textual alignments. It's also relevant to note that many of the calendars and cycles mentioned by the prophets are based on lunar and solar codes. This manifests in the way time is measured in the scriptures: sabbatical years, jubilees, weeks of years. Jeremiah implies that certain divine promises would activate at specific times in the sacred calendar. It's as if there were temporal portals, windows of redemption that could only be opened by those who know the code. The lineage of Christ, therefore, is not just a biological thread, but a chronological one, marked by dates, numbers, and predestined events. Among the Kabbalists, there is a belief that each generation has a hidden descendant of David, someone with the potential to be the Messiah if humanity is ready. This concept is known as Mashiach ben David, the Redeemer descendant of David. This being is not only identified by their lineage, but by cosmic and numerical signs that indicate their time of manifestation. Thus, the code not only points to the who, but to the when. And this temporal dimension is perhaps the most sensitive of all. If we look closely, we will notice that important events in the life of Christ seem to have been shaped by this type of prophetic count. His birth during a Roman census, his crucifixion during Easter, the resurrection on the third day, all of this carries a symbolic precision that goes beyond chance. It's as if Jesus' life had been choreographed by an ancient script, written in letters and numbers even before he was born. Jeremiah, when speaking of eternal covenants and future justice, may have been transcribing this same script. Recent discoveries made by scholars of ancient texts, especially those applying algorithms to Hebrew texts, suggest that there are complex patterns of repetitions, crosswords, and mathematical formulas that we are only now beginning to understand. These patterns often point to themes related to redemption, the messianic lineage, and the return of a righteous king. Could Jeremiah and his contemporaries have left a coded map? A textual path that, if deciphered, leads us directly to the heart of Christ's lineage? All of this leads us to a provocative conclusion. Prophecy, to be fully understood, requires more than faith. It requires decoding. Jeremiah, with his dense words and enigmatic images, may have been one of the first to use this system deliberately. His words are not just messages, they are spiritual equations. And perhaps only now, with the advancement of linguistics and mathematics, are we ready to understand what he really tried to tell us. At the end of this section, the feeling is that everything is connected. Letters, numbers, prophecies, and lineages form a single living organism, a dynamic scripture in constant revelation. The Hebrew code, far from being a mystical curiosity, could be the invisible thread that links Jeremiah to Christ and Christ to the present. And if numbers don't lie, then the time of revelation is not only approaching, it has already begun. For centuries, the image of Mary Magdalene has been distorted, reduced to a caricature of repentance, portrayed as a reformed sinner. But beneath this constructed narrative, there is a much more complex and powerful figure, a woman close to Jesus, perhaps more than any other disciple, and who carries with her secrets that echo in esoteric traditions to this day. The Gospel of Mary, an apocryphal text discovered in the 19th century and dated from the early centuries of Christianity, presents us with a different and deeply transformative version of the relationship between her and the Master. In this Gospel, Mary not only speaks, but also leads. She interprets visions, comforts the disciples, and conveys secret teachings that Christ would have entrusted to her. The mere existence of this text is already a challenge to the traditional canon. But what makes it even more impactful is the reverence with which the other disciples treat her. Peter, at one point, even challenges her authority, only to be reprimanded by Levi, who asserts that the Master loved her more than all others. This statement alone reignites an old suspicion. Was there a union between Mary and Jesus? The New Testament is subtle but consistent in demonstrating the closeness between the two. Mary Magdalene is the first to see the resurrected Jesus, which, in theological and symbolic terms, is profoundly significant. The resurrection is the culmination of Christian faith, and this revelation was not given to Peter, nor to John, but to her. In ancient cultures, this type of transmission held testamentary value. In the spiritual and real world of lineage, this choice was not accidental. It was intentional, and this changes everything. Now imagine that this union was more than spiritual. Imagine it was blood-related. Some Gnostic, Kabbalistic, and even Templar traditions suggest that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married, and from this union a child was born, or a lineage. This concept, known as the Holy Lineage, or Sangreal, is not new. It is present in ancient texts, Arthurian legends, and traditions preserved by secret societies. The Holy Grail would then cease to be an object and become a womb, a living inheritance, carried by Mary. The Grail, in this sense, is the Sangreal, the royal blood. A hidden lineage, not only biological but spiritual, which would have survived for centuries through protected generations. According to this view, the descendants of Christ and Mary were taken to the south of France, where they gave rise to the Merovingian dynasty, linked to the mystical orders of the Middle Ages. This lineage, protected by monks, Templars, and Cathars, would have been systematically persecuted by the church and empires that saw in it an unacceptable challenge to the status quo. Many dismiss these ideas as myth or speculation, but the fragments that have survived in texts such as the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gnostic writings found in Nag Hammadi reveal a parallel Christian tradition, less institutionalized, more female-centered, and recognizing Mary Magdalene in a central role, not only as a disciple, but as a transmitter of a living legacy. A legacy that could not be shared with everyone, only with those who had ears to hear. This legacy includes teachings that point to a radical inner transformation, a direct connection with the divine without the need for mediators. Mary speaks in the apocryphal gospel of knowledge that is received through intuition, inner vision, and that allows the human being to ascend to the supreme reality. This path of spiritual ascension is the true code, and Mary, the guardian. But this ascension may also have been a symbolic way of talking about the activation of a dormant lineage, an awakening that begins in the blood and rises to consciousness. The canonical Gospels were written at a time when the organization of the Church required rigid structures of authority. The role of women was minimized, mysticism was replaced by dogma, and the apocryphal Gospels were declared heretical. Mary Magdalene was reduced to the status of a forgiven sinner, obscuring the power that her true identity could carry. But if she was indeed the wife of Christ, or at least his most intimate spiritual companion, then her figure represents the conjunction of opposites, the sacred masculine and feminine united in a divine mission. The possibility of a lineage stemming from this union shatters the boundaries of institutionalized faith. It suggests that the historical Christ was not only a divine avatar, but also a complete human being, capable of loving, uniting, and procreating. And from this procreation came not just a biological child, but a consciousness code, subtly transmitted and safeguarded for centuries within spiritual families, mystical orders, and esoteric lineages. This code is not accessed through dogmas, but through awakening. Today, many feel this calling without being able to explain it. Dreams, visions, unexplainable intuitions, attraction to certain symbols, affinity with traditions they have never studied. These are the signs that the code is reactivating. And if you feel something when hearing these words, it could be that this calling is resonating in you too. Blood is not only genetic, it's memory. It's energy that pulses through generations, waiting for the moment to remember who it is and why it came. At the end of this section, we're not just talking about alternative histories. We're looking into a mirror. Mary Magdalene might have been the guardian of Christ's lineage, but her mission didn't end with her life. It continues in all those who today seek to unite love and truth, spirit and matter, consciousness and action. The Gospel of Mary isn't just a lost text, it's a silent summons. And perhaps at this very moment you're hearing its call. The Holy Grail. Few symbols have traversed so many eras, traditions, and interpretations with such vigor. At first glance, it is presented as a chalice, the cup that Jesus would have used at the Last Supper, or the vessel that collected his blood during the crucifixion. This image, popularized by medieval literature, Arthurian legends, and later by cinema, has become the icon of a mystical quest. But what many do not know is that the Grail was never just an object. It is, above all, a hidden enigma about lineage, blood, and the sacred feminine. The term Grail derives from the Old French Grail, or Grille, which can also mean vessel, container, or even womb, and it is at this point that the veil begins to fall. The Holy Grail, according to some Hermetic and Gnostic traditions, was not a physical chalice, but the body of Mary Magdalene, bearer of the royal blood, the Sangreal, a term that unfolds as both Holy Grail and royal blood. This double reading is anything but accidental. The legends of the Arthurian cycle are filled with cryptic symbols. The Grail appears as an object of power that only the pure of heart can find. but it is also a mystery tied to the lineage of kings. In many tales, the quest for the Grail is directly linked to the restoration of the kingdom, to the healing of a wounded land. The land and the king are connected, and only the one who finds the Grail can restore the balance. But what is really wounded? What is hidden? Perhaps it's not the chalice, but the memory of the sacred lineage. Throughout the Middle Ages, various secret orders emerged claiming to hold secrets related to the Grail: the Templars, the Cathars, the Rosicrucians. These orders, often persecuted by the Church and the Empire, spoke of an ancient knowledge, a spiritual heritage passed down from generation to generation, and most importantly, of a hidden truth about Christ and his lineage. Mary Magdalene in this narrative is the living ark carrying the royal blood, not a metal chalice, but a sacred womb that gave birth to the continuity of the incarnate Word. The idea of the womb as the Grail is not strange to ancient traditions. In Egypt, Isis is the divine mother who reassembles Osiris and gives birth to Horus. In Kabbalah, the feminine presence of God, the Shekinah, is the receptacle of divine light. In early Christianity, before the imposition of ecclesiastical patriarchy, the feminine was respected as a channel of the sacred. The Grail in this context represents not only the feminine, but the union between spirit and matter, between divinity and flesh, between Christ and Mary, which gives birth to the true inheritance, the spiritual awakening of humanity. But why would this truth need to be concealed? Because it breaks paradigms. It asserts that salvation is not just something that comes from outside, but that is born within us. If the Grail is in the blood, if the divine was transmitted through a living lineage, then we all have the potential to reconnect with this sacred origin. And this challenges the spiritual monopoly of institutions. Spiritual power would no longer be centralized in dogmas or religious structures, but distributed among all those who carry the spark of Christ consciousness. The presence of the Grail as a symbol also connects with the alchemical concept of transmutation. The chalice, as a vessel, represents the womb of the world, where the spirit descends into matter and is transformed. In other words, the Grail is the symbol of the incarnation of divinity in the human. It is not a sacred object that we need to find outside of ourselves, but an inner reality that needs to be recognized and awakened. The real blood is in those who remember, in those who feel the call, in those who seek the truth beyond appearance. In the Druid traditions, which deeply influence the Grail legends, there is always the figure of a lady or priestess who guards the mystery. Morgana, Vivian, or even Mary under another name. This hidden feminine is the guardian of the secret, and it is only revealed to those who purify their inner vision. The quest for the Grail, therefore, is not a geographical journey. It is an inner voyage of rediscovery of the sacred within oneself and in the hidden lineage of humanity. This lineage, for some, is literal, living descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, who were taken to Gaul and protected by underground faith communities. For others, it is spiritual, men and women who awaken in each generation to their true divine identity. Most importantly, from both perspectives, the Grail is not an object to be worshipped, but a principle to be lived, a call that echoes in those who listen with their heart. Today, many feel this calling, a nameless restlessness, a search for something that is not in books, nor in pulpits, but that throbs like an ancestral drum within the chest. And what if this restlessness is the Grail calling you? And what if the thirst you feel is precisely the sign that you are part of this living lineage? The chalice is not in a museum, it is in your story, in your body, in your mission. The Grail is not a chalice, it is you. At the end of this part, the veil nearly unravels. The mystery of the Grail, far from being solved, becomes more intimate, closer, more personal. We are not just deciphering ancient stories. We are hearing echoes of our own awakening. And perhaps, like knights of yore, we have been called to this journey not to find a sacred object, but to remember who we are. The lineage is not lost. It is alive, It is waiting. And now maybe it is calling you by name. In the final chapters of the book of Jeremiah, there is a promise that resonates with an almost silent strength, but impossible to ignore. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, not like the covenant I made with their fathers, but this will be my covenant. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. This is Jeremiah's last prophecy. It is not about destruction nor exile. It is about rebirth. And it is exactly here that the hidden lineage of Christ re-encounters its purpose. This new alliance is unlike anything that came before. It is not written in stone. It does not rely on temples, recorded genealogies, or institutions. It is written in the invisible, in what pulses from within. The promised lineage no longer manifests solely in blood, but in living consciousness. The awakening of the lineage, then, is not just an external event. It is an internal call, a reminder of who you are before any name, belief, or past. It is the recognition that you carry within you the spark of the King Prophet, of the Messiah who unites flesh and spirit. For centuries, the world has awaited a second coming. It has looked to the sky, translated prophecies, speculated dates and signs. But perhaps the second coming was never about a man descending from the clouds. Maybe it's about an inner descent, a collective activation of the Christ lineage within many. No longer a singular Messiah, but a messianic generation, dispersed like stars, but united by the same vibrational code: unconditional love, inner truth, courage to live with purpose. This is the melting point between Jeremiah's code, the Essene manuscripts, the womb of Mary Magdalene, and the mystery of the Grail. All of this converges to a new kind of human being, a being who knows who they are, even if the world has yet to recognize them. A being who carries lineage not in their surname, but in their mission. The true heir of Christ is not just the one who descends biologically, but the one who manifests Christ's consciousness in the world. And this awakening has already begun, in vivid dreams, in powerful intuitions, in synchronicities that become frequent, in tears that fall without reason, but which wash away the veil of forgetfulness. The lineage is awakening in ordinary people, mothers, artists, teachers, healers, spiritual seekers, people who don't see themselves as special, but who feel an inner fire that doesn't go out. This is the sign. The code is active. The new covenant is being fulfilled. But this awakening is not comfortable. It requires detachment. It confronts inner and outer lies. It burns identities built on fear. The true heir does not seek thrones or applause. He seeks to serve. He kneels to listen, to heal, to transform. The power that this lineage carries is not the power of dominion, but of alignment with the eternal purpose. And for this reason, it is indestructible. It cannot be erased nor forgotten, only dormant, until now. Jeremiah saw this time. He predicted that there would be a generation that would no longer need books to know the truth, that all will know me from the least to the greatest. This is the generation that is living now, and it doesn't matter your origin, your religion, your history. What matters is what resonates within you when you hear this, because lineage is not measured with DNA tests. It is recognized by the call, and if you've come this far, it's likely that the call is already sounding within your heart. The ancient prophecies were not written to be feared, but to be activated. They are seeds, and every seed needs darkness before breaking through the earth. Every lineage needs silence before being revealed. The code of Jeremiah, the hidden teachings of Baruch, the secrets of the Essene desert, the sacred womb of Mary, the Grail hidden among legends. All of this was preparation for the now, for this exact moment when you remember that you were never separated. And what to do with this memory? Live. Not as before, but with presence, with integrity, with compassion for oneself and for others. The heir of the Christic lineage is not a chosen one in the elitist sense. It is someone who chooses to remember who they are in a world that lives on forgetfulness. It is someone who plants justice where there is pain, who offers presence where there is abandonment, who upholds truth even where everyone else bows to lies. This is the mission of the lineage, and it is yours too. In the end, there is no end, only a new beginning. Jeremiah's last prophecy is not a conclusion. It's a door. The lineage was not lost. It was just dormant, waiting for the right time to emerge. That time has arrived. The era of the hidden lineage has come to an end. Now is the era of the awakened lineage. And if you feel your heart racing, your skin prickling, or a tear wanting to fall, it's because you know. You always knew. If this journey has sparked something within you, tell me in the comments. Do you feel you can carry part of this lineage? Have you had signs, dreams, or intuitions that seem to remind you of something greater? Comment below using your heart. When you share, you activate. And when more of us express ourselves, the more the lineage awakens together. This is the collective manifestation happening in real time, here, now with your voice. And before you go, mind unfettered, there's an essential video waiting for you here on the screen. The hidden code of Sinai, the lost teaching of Jesus that could change the world. It's the next step in this journey, unveiling the forgotten teachings that could change everything we think about spirituality, legacy, and awakening. Click and continue this discovery. The revelation has just begun.